next item on our work agenda is the Powerdale corridor, the next steps. It's a co-presentation among both our staff and the Watershed Council. Is that correct?
I'm Cindy Thiemann, Hood River Watershed Group Director.
And I'm Alex Danielson, Hood River Watershed Group Restoration and Outreach Project Manager.
And I'm Corey Wiesner. I'm the Public Works Director for Hood River County.
And then Kate Conley from Colonial Interest is online.
Hi, everyone.
So this is to talk about the possibility if the powerhouse is removed. We put a picture. Yes, Arthur, we used your picture.
No, I think it's great. I love to see those. Yeah.
To talk about what we're here to talk about today, just a little bit about the powerhouse and Powerdale history, conservation easement, how it became county ownership, some recent upgrades planned and completed, done by County Public Works as well as in partnership with the Watershed Group. Then we'll turn it over and talk about watershed restoration contacts, the Powerdale corridor feasibility studies, and then funding and project management opportunities if we were to remove it or if we were to keep it in place. And then in the board meeting, next steps are we're going to ask you guys what you would like us to do with that. Kate, you want to go ahead?
So just the immediate issue is that there is a funding opportunity and you're asking for permission to advance on that funding opportunity. Is that fair?
So there is funding opportunities. There's also partnership opportunity, and there is the Watershed Group is willing to project manage if we remove it.
Great.
And so there is some momentum behind it if we were able to remove it.
Great, thank you.
All right, I thought I'd start with a little bit of history to provide some context for anybody who's not as familiar with this project. And Corey, are you operating the presentation right now? So if okay, I'll say next then when I need it. So the Powerdale Dam was construction was finished in 1923, and the powerhouse began generating electricity that spring. Next. The Powerdale Hydroelectric Project took up about 400 acres of land along the lower Hood River, which you can see outlined there in black. Next. And the dam itself was all the way up at River Mile 4.2. So the water was actually diverted at that dam site into a pipeline that ran downstream about 3 miles to the powerhouse. Next. Which is still in place. The building is still in place near the downstream end of the Powerdale lands. And next. And currently, Hood River County owns the parcels that are highlighted there in yellow, and Columbia Land Trust owns the rest of that property outlined in black. Next. So this is a timeline of the process of decommissioning a hydroelectric project. I don't think I'll go through it all tonight, but I just wanted to point out that this really all started in 2000 when the federal license for the project expired. PacifiCorp was the utility company that owned the project, and it was realized that in order for them to make the upgrades, they would need to get a new license through the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. They would have to spend more money than they'd be able to make back in revenue by selling electricity from the Powerdale project. So they decided that economically it made more sense to decommission the project. There were a lot of agreements and processes they had to follow to get to that point. In the midst of all of the negotiating in 2006, there was a large flood on the Hood River, which damaged the pipeline to the extent that they had to shut down the plant. They decided not to fix the pipeline at that point because it had already been decided that the Powerdale Dam was going to be removed in a few years. So the project did shut down in 2006, but the dam itself wasn't removed until 2010. And in that time, there were decisions made about who was going to own the land, what was going to happen to all the infrastructure how the land was going to get managed, and many other real estate related questions. And it took until 2013 to actually get enough answers to those things, finalize the deals, and hand the land over to Columbia Land Trust and Hood River County. At the same time that the land was deeded to the county and the land trust, these new landowners granted a conservation easement to 5 different entities. So those are listed here in acronyms, but it's the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs, Hood River Watershed Group, the Hood River Valley Parks and Recreation District, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, and then the county granted that easement to Columbia Land Trust, and Columbia Land Trust granted that easement to the county. So each of us Powerdale landowners has 5 other entities that are sort of looking over our shoulder and making sure that we're doing what we're supposed to do with these lands that came with some strings attached. Next slide, please. So the main content of the conservation easement is really the goals that we must follow when we're deciding how to manage these lands. Our first goal is to protect the existing fish and wildlife habitat and work on habitat restoration and enhancement. Our second goal is to retain the recreational uses that existed at the time the powerhouse was operational. So back when Pacificor owned the land and operated the hydro project, they allowed public access to that 400 acres of land. And when the conservation easement goals were written by a group of stakeholders before we gained ownership of the lands, they decided it's important that this land stay open and accessible to the public. So that's the second goal, but those public uses do have to be consistent with goal 1, the habitat protection. Goal 3 allows for the expanded educational or recreational opportunities, but again, those things would have to be consistent with goal 1. And then goal 4 is to acknowledge and preserve the rights of Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs members to access their off-reservation fishing sites. Next slide. So that brings us to present day Powerdale management. We're 12 years in at this point, and Hood River County and Columbia Land Trust each manage and take care of their parcels of the Powerdale lands as full landowners of those sites. So we have our own responsibilities and liabilities, but we also collaborate with each other. We have an ownership agreement that states our shared responsibilities and some of our shared funding. We also have a Powerdale Lands Advisory Committee, which is comprised of all of the conservation easement grantees. So those 5 entities that help make sure that the landowners are following those goals. And then in addition to those easement grantees, we have members of the public, community representatives, and neighboring landowners on that advisory committee. So any of our management actions, we report to the advisory committee members. We discuss what we're planning to do. And in that way, we try to make sure that any of our planning has been run past many of our stakeholders. And that way we don't accidentally do something that would be counter to the conservation easement terms. So that's an important part of our management. And then we do have a general management plan that lays out the history, context, and general goals for our management. We also have a recreation and access plan, which talks specifically about the public access issues and our goals for improving and maintaining public access. And that was created probably about 8 or 9 years ago with community input that was coordinated through that Powerdale Lands Advisory Committee. So that's kind of how we do our operations now under the current ownership. And I would just point out that all of those management plans and advising that happens, they all tie back to those conservation easement goals and the other rules that were written into that conservation easement. Next slide. So that brings us to the question of what to do with the powerhouse building. We've owned the lands, the county and the land trust have owned the lands for 12 years. The powerhouse building is still sitting there. So next, and I apologize for the having to say next so many times, I wasn't thinking about not being in charge of the buttons. So the conservation easement, besides laying out those 4 goals, it has a list of prohibited uses on the Powerdale lands. One of them is that there are no commercial or industrial uses allowed on that property. So we haven't been able to explore any concepts that would involve some kind of business use of the building. Another consideration is that the driveway down to the powerhouse and the intersection of that driveway with Highway 35 are not really compatible with increased traffic. It's a very narrow road. It's on a steep slope that's had slope failures in the past. And for anybody who's been down there, it can be a little bit sketchy to pull out of that driveway and merge onto the highway because there's really not good lines of sight. So it's not a very safe situation for bringing in lots of increased traffic. Next. Now, the conservation easement does allow for expanded recreational or educational uses of the lands. And so we've considered maybe there's a way we could reuse the building for education or as a recreation hub of some sort. We haven't, the landowners and the advisory committee members haven't come up with any concepts for that were obviously going to be feasible from an economic standpoint or access, the road access issue. And then we also have to remember that any of those educational or recreational uses have to be consistent with habitat protection and restoration. So with that focus on habitat, the advisory committee and landowners have worked with the Hood River Watershed Group to assess the habitat restoration opportunities that might exist at that powerhouse site. Our watershed group staff there at the meeting tonight are going to talk about that in detail a little bit later. I just wanted to point out next that in order to do a habitat riverbank and river restoration project at that site, we would be talking about removing the building. So I wanted to point out that some of the legwork to work towards building removal was completed by Pacific Corps. They had to get federal permits to do all of the decommissioning work for the hydroelectric project. And as part of that, they had a full cultural and historical survey of all of their infrastructure. And they basically had to work through the process that would allow them to remove or damage any and all of that infrastructure. So Oregon State Historic Preservation Office, or SHPO, has already kind of gone through that permitting process, has required Pacific Corps to do the mitigation work that would be required if they did remove the building, and has confirmed for us that all the required mitigation has been completed. So we would be able to go forward with powerhouse building removal without having to do additional mitigation for SHPO's purposes. That's not to say that we wouldn't want to mitigate for removing a historic resource, but just that we wouldn't have to start from square one on those permitting issues. Next. So the concept that we've been talking about in the advisory committee is that we may be able to design a river habitat restoration project at the site where the building and the fill that the building is sitting on are currently located, and that we would want to incorporate public access into the design for that restoration project because we know people still want to access the river there, and that we could make it a safe place for the public to access the river rather than a place where there are a lot of hazards because of damaged infrastructure and use that hasn't been super closely managed over the years. And then once we had a design that would incorporate the restoration and the recreation aspects, we could also bring in some of that educational component with some interpretive information about the past uses of that site. So that's the idea that we're putting out there this evening, and I will let Corey and the Watershed Group staff talk more about the work that we've done up until this point.
So at this point, this is what the powerhouse looked like when we took over in 2013. That pipeline is no longer there. And so I'll go to the next one. Kate touched on the Powerhouse Corridor property was acquired in 2013. Some projects that we have undertaken as a county was removing a pipeline from the Powerhouse to Mount Hood Railroad, removal of the Copper Dam caretaker site, and we've removed some garbage cans and restrooms that was causing some hazards in the previous area at time. Recent work that's been undertaken since our parks manager and has started, we've had significant garbage removal. There was a population that was incorporating in that site, and the garbage was getting into the river, and so he worked with our partners with McCack and Center for Living and tried to find a way to humanely not have them on the site. And then additionally, I don't know how many tons of garbage, but it was significant tons of garbage that was removed from the site. We've done weed and brush maintenance is only performed as we have time and capacity. We've removed the underground storage tank at the Copper Dam caretaker house. I found a septic system that was at the powerhouse because we found that there was a giant hole in the ground, and so we've resecured that and capped those appropriately. Still, we're working on the phase 1 ESA to determine if the powerhouse site can be identified as a no further actions with DEQ through our brownfield grant. And then we're working on a gate, power gate that has been approved through our NSA permit, through building permit. And then, so once that gets put in place, we will look at the possibility of what we can do about securing that site a little bit better. So here's a picture of it now and some recent pictures that we have seen. So the powerhouse looks a lot like that does today. And then the whole picture is garbage that we clean up frequently and it gets filled up again.
What's that rightmost picture?
So that was our septic tank.
Oh, okay.
That's how we found out that there was a septic tank at the site. The door, I believe, still looks like that on the bottom left. We leave it open now because every time that we close it, we weld it shut. Somebody goes in with some torches and open it back up. Those RVs are no longer there. That was part of the cleanup that happened.
So I just want to talk a little bit about the larger restoration context of the Powerdale corridor relative to the watershed as a whole, before Alex talks more specifically about concepts for the site, for the powerhouse site. As I think all of you know, the Hood River watershed is a really steep watershed. So compared to other watersheds coming off of Mount Hood, like the Sandy watershed has a much longer travel distance from the top of Hood down to where it joins the Columbia River. So that translates, that short steep watershed translates into less sort of floodplain habitat. And floodplain habitat is really critical for salmon and steelhead populations. And so that's like precious real estate for us in the Hood River watershed, is making sure that every scrap of floodplain connection that we can restore gets restored. And then you put on top of that the main stem of the river. So several years ago, we developed a strategic action plan with partners in the basin, the tribes, the Forest Service, ODF&W, and we used a model that Bonneville Power Administration had developed, that looked at where to prioritize, where should you restore in your watershed first, what's the most important, subwater, what are the most important subwatersheds to restore first? And, those tend to be places with, a lot of good restoration potential, but it's also largely driven by the fish populations. And so if you have a subwatershed where you have 6, out of 6 of your threatened fish species utilizing that subwatershed, that automatically raises in importance to complete restoration work. So that's, as you might expect, that's what you see in lower down in probably almost any watershed, is that the fish entering, all of the fish entering the Hood River watershed are entering along the main stem, moving through the main stem. We have spring and fall Chinook, we have winter and summer steelhead, we have coho, we have bull trout, and all of those, go through the main stem. Fall Chinook really are pretty much limited to the main stem. They don't really get much past the main stem. And the other thing about that area is that it's, in addition to having sort of all of the species utilizing it, is that you've got the sort of year-round habitat. So the upper portions of the watershed have some really great habitat, but they get really cold in the wintertime. And so what we'll see is a lot of our species spawning in the upper watershed, but then some of those juveniles, once they reach a certain size, we think likely move down lower into the watershed in the wintertime to take advantage of warmer temperatures, more food. So again, it kind of all circles back to having really good habitat on the main stem. The main stem Hood River that doesn't have access to its floodplain has higher velocities. It doesn't have sort of the quieter habitat on the edges that good floodplain connectivity affords. So, and the other thing that is really compelling about this area of the main stem is the public ownership. So we have, there's 400 acres that are, in public ownership, or in the Columbia Land Trust isn't public, but it's a nonprofit geared towards managing their land in that way. So I would say that, that is one of the reasons why we prioritized taking a look at the whole Powerdale corridor for restoration opportunities. So I'll turn it over to Al.
Do you want this one?
Oh, and this, yeah, and so this is a sort of underscores, illustrates. So this is the 2006 flood that Kate had mentioned, and you can see where the water is at a flood this stage. It is the floodplain, it's not obviously good floodplain habitat as it is right now, but it's definitely within the footprint of the Hood River's floodplain.
So just to make sure I'm understanding, maybe Alex is going to talk about this, but the basic concept is that when the river floods, you want to give it a place to go so that the mainstream velocities are not so high that it causes damage to habitat. And
Yeah,
say a few more words about
main,
what's the real goal in plain words instead of, because we don't know your language.
Alex will get into the details of the sort of specific objectives, but yes, I mean, you're not gonna the velocity on the main stem is going to be high when you have at flood stage, but rivers that then are able to spread out into that floodplain, in that floodplain the velocities are much lower, and the habitat, there's cover, there's physical structure that lowers the velocity. Smaller fish can be off of the main channel without getting, otherwise they get washed down into the Columbia. They just simply taken out of the watershed.
So this is all about looking for ways to restore the historic floodplain.
Yes.
Everywhere we can. Everywhere it makes sense.
Yeah, every scrap that we can
Right
get.
now, Tad is listening to our equipment on the lower East Fork right now. It's
Right.
doing exactly that, tripling our floodplain access in that high priority watershed. So the main stem is as Cindy's mentioning, a tier one. Just to get into this, it's a lot of words. Again, I won't encourage anyone to really read them, but just to say that a lot of what we wanted to do in this feasibility study is tee off of the watershed 2040 strategic action plan that Partners in the Basin worked on, and the conservation easement goals that Kate mentioned and outlined earlier. So a lot of these goals up there, and the overall study goal is to take this priority almost 4 mile reach of the main stem and say, okay, where are our highest priority, best opportunities for habitat restoration, and how feasible is it? How do we prioritize the one? So we looked at about 5 different sites, one of which is right downstream of the former dam site, and that project is going to get implemented this next summer, in about a year from now. And we are now looking at the powerhouse as the next potential project. And then there are several other sites within that kind of 3 to 4 mile reach that we've identified as potential opportunities for restoration, and have worked together. This all happened in 2024. The partners that Cindy mentioned earlier and that Kate mentioned, also part of the plaque, that includes the watershed group, the county. It includes the tribes, it includes the Forest Service, the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, Bonneville Power Administration, and others, and kind of came together and said, okay, here are our goals for this watershed, or for for the Powerdale corridor, based on the conservation easement, and said, okay, what can we do here? And then we came up with these 5 goals. And there are a lot of bullet points underneath each one of those goals. And so we really have sort of a guiding light to identify these projects and pursue them. And so, Arthur, getting a little bit more into what you had mentioned. So for each one of our sites that we identified, we worked with Interflu, the local engineering firm that specializes in these types of projects. We came up with conceptual designs for these sites, and there's sort of a baseline design. There's a no action design, there's a baseline, and then usually a tier. What you're looking for is the powerhouse specifically. You can kind of see the railroad and where the powerhouse is, kind of in the right side of the screen there. And this is sort of this particular concept is throwing everything at the wall. So taking out removing the powerhouse, all of that sort of crosshatch area, that's all fill removal. So removing all of that fill right now, this whole section of the river that you can see in the screen here, both from the railroad and from the powerhouse, is entirely riprap. So that is how we very effectively cut off the river from its floodplain, make a nice barrier there so that as the water comes up, or in general, you have a single threaded, very straight and with high velocities, especially in high flow. And so Cindy mentioned sort of that very inhospitable atmosphere for anything in that channel at high flows. It's basically a fire hose. But if that riprap wasn't there, if that fill wasn't there, as the water came up, it has and we can engineer that path so that it moves where it's appropriate to move, and fill in that floodplain, create that slower water, create those resting places, that flood refuge, and also at the same time minimize the impacts of flooding on our infrastructure and existing river corridor. Minimize erosion and things like that we've seen pretty frequently in this watershed from these big water events.
Could we spend because this one I felt was kind of the most confusing and the most interesting. looks to me, what I see here, you have the railroad,
Mhm.
the railroad bridge, and you have the railroad, which the railroad is effectively on a dike, which is preventing the river from entering that floodplain. So instead, you're creating a back eddy.
Mhm.
So number one, is that a super good thing to do for habitat? And number two, in doing that, are you increasing the risk of washing out the railroad? I didn't see any discussion of that in the interfluve document. I might have missed it. I didn't read every word.
Yeah, well, and
Yeah.
there were a lot of words.
There were.
And this is not the only document you had to read, I'm sure. So first and foremost, I want to mention that these are conceptual designs.
Right.
They have a model, Interfluve has a model that they put together, that's just basically existing conditions. So they know what the river does during existing conditions, and they can use that to help come up with these conceptual designs. If we were to pursue this project, we'd have a lot of steps to take to determine those specific answers to what are the risks. We can't raise the existing floodplain or the 100-year flood levels. We would have to make sure that there are safety calculations and risk calculations. There's a whole bunch of engineering that goes into that. So
So the stability of the railroad is part of that process. Okay, because that was something that bothered me a little in reading it. I didn't see that mentioned.
yes.
So,
And they're making informed decisions when they're offering this as a concept. They wouldn't offer it if it weren't something they thought that they could do
Right.
without
Sure.
any large risk to the railroad. But again, this is throwing, and so the baseline concept is take out the powerhouse and the fill. So open up that floodplain at the lower end there. Then there's more excavation and emphasis on the lower part of that alcove and channel. And then this is, let's make a whole floodplain channel out of it. If you're going to do that, so your one question, Arthur, about is this good habitat or does this make sense? So that right now, if you were to go down there and look down, there's this big pool and kind of existing alcove that has eddied out from around the powerhouse. That is really ideal habitat. We try to recreate that in projects where, especially, there's certain species that really thrive. So in big pools, that's where smaller fish find refuge, they find food. Adult fish will rest there, spring chinook rest in these big pools for months before they move up into the watershed and spawn. And then alcoves in particular are the perfect little nursery, particularly for coho salmon. So whenever we know that there's coho in particular tributaries in this watershed, we always try to identify where we can create this kind of habitat feature. But when you do that, you want to make sure that there's a water input to it. And that is, in this case, there's clearly water, subsurface water that comes, groundwater that either comes off of that steep slope or and then kind of comes down that existing low point. And then groundwater hyperrhea flow that probably comes from the river itself and moves through those low points in that floodplain. And, as Cindy pointed out, we saw where the water goes in a really high flow. There's that kind of draw in general. So what this one is suggesting is how can we really encourage that flow that comes right now sort of underneath the railroad? And that would be a much longer conversation with the railroad to see if they would really allow us to tap into the river underneath the railroad or something like that. I'm not particularly hopeful in that sense, but there is, but then again, capturing the seasonal groundwater flow is what this is really identifying here. So
Can I say just really quick? I mean, you asked, does this concept, just kind of off the bat seem like it would pose a risk to the railroad? And I think that it's not. Maybe if you put like what Alex was just mentioning, maybe if there was a culvert underneath, bringing water from the main, from the main stem, underneath, maybe that's an opportunity that could be destabilizing, but that's not,
Just see-
that's not what is shown here.
It could also
Well,
be a relief though.
it could be, but I mean, you're removing a whole bunch of rock, which prevents the back eddy from scouring out the abutments to the railroad bridge. So, I mean,
Yeah,
someone else has to engineer this, not me. I'm just, right. I want to make sure, I got really excited about this plan, reading the description of it, and I think it's like, yeah, but this is never gonna fly because you have a railroad that's teetering on the edge, and it's gonna be really easy to raise enough doubt about it that it's gonna kill the project, so.
and the thing is, that, like Alex said earlier, the whole, going way back to the far left, that's sort of the probably the biggest extent that, of that footprint. It may
Right.
not go all the way back.
Right.
When it
Right.
comes down to the actual.
But you're talking about the fill removal.
I just,
Yeah.
again, I'm not engineering this, I would love to get excited about this project that, if I've worked in enough, things similar to this to know that, this is really ambitious.
Yeah.
But-
That's the
Without
exciting
word,
part too, but
Yeah.
yeah, and these projects, especially in a highly accessed, FEMA mapped floodplain with critical infrastructure. It will be a highly engineered project that won't get permitted if we
Right.
wouldn't be able to show that through the engineering process and the modeling that we couldn't ensure that we were not increasing the risks to any of this infrastructure.
Right.
But I think the benefits too, I mean, just removing that amount of fill and opening that access and that, this is being recorded,
It is.
we are, with the potential for flood mitigation is, for this amount of, just to give the water a place to go that isn't where we don't want it to go those are really key benefits to projects like that.
So any individual, the document we had, I don't know, 6 different ideas on it, I think. Any individual one of those by itself has benefit, right? It's not that you have to do all of these or even most of them in order to, there's incremental benefit to everything you do. Is that correct?
So I would like to add regarding the railroad and the concerns that I've heard from the railroad is access and trespassing.
Right.
And so if we can, this is a great viewpoint. If we are able to do something like this, we concentrate the crossing to a certain spot where right now they're just going wherever they want to on the railroad. And so this may be a win for the railroad. I mean, obviously they'd be a partner in this conversation because they're an abutting property.
That seems really important after going down and spending some time down there to corral everybody through one place.
Yeah.
And if this were to come to fruition to this extent, what would that do for parking and access? Because to me, one of the most wonderful potential outcomes is that the people living in Hood River and the little kids would have a place closer that was much more natural. You go down there and it's so unnatural that it's kind of hard to get excited about it.
Yep.
You look at all of the dikes and everything. And I totally understand the problems with the bridge, and I trust that there probably are engineers that can figure that out. But what would this do to, I know I read some of the problems with the access. You can't get there from here. It's true from behind Rose Hours, and it's true farther up the river off of Highway 35, and then there's Copper Dam Road. And I get that problem with access everywhere else. If we did more flooding here, would that make the access of people more difficult to this? It would be about the same. Okay.
And it is highly seasonally dependent, how high that, the river's pretty low right now. We're at the lowest time of year. And depending on the time of year, but right now that whole fill area is inaccessible, or the access to the water is inaccessible.
Right,
And there's no sort of direct water access from that side until you cross the railroad and go upriver, or you cross the bridge and hit that beach area on the other side. And so, I think without a doubt, in any project like this, we did, but particularly how highly visited and, the potential for that access, in line with the conservation easement goals is that, well, we could really, create river access here that, that maybe would solve some of the other issues, but we want to be really mindful of, well, this is, how do we make sure that those two goals don't conflict with each other, that creating habitat,
and access,
and access.
exactly.
Don't always go hand in hand, so that would have to be a key component of anything done at this time.
I keep reminding people that in 1923, the access was, there was a sidewalk on the bridge. The bridge had a pathway on it, so people accessed it from the train station. It would walk along the side and they didn't have to come in to that parking area at all.
Well, they still access it from that way, but
Now
not.
they're
not
walking on the
legally.
bridge,
Not
right.
legally.
Not safely.
I'm saying there was a safe walkway on the bridge and I don't know why that was removed.
Yeah, and we did a walkthrough with the
Yeah.
railroad out there.
Yeah.
Matt and Kate and I, and kind of brainstorm some of those options. Because that is the key point for the railroad is whatever you do, we have to figure out how to deal with the trespassing.
Right.
And so now you were going to lead us through the the potential next steps.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
So, I just wanna. This is really a conversation of, we've kind of talked a lot about the removal. There is a leave in place option, that is available as well. So if we are to remove the powerhouse, Watershed Group, will participate with a funding match with their OWEB FIP funding.
What was that? Say it again.
So the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, a state agency, the partners in the basin.
The $10 million focused investment funding that I've talked about with you guys before.
Thanks.
So if we decide to go forward with this, if you guys decide to go forward with it, they're gonna apply and try and get, their FIP money to go to this project.
We already
Okay.
have it identified for a Powerdale project. Whether it goes to this one or somewhere else is
The question.
yeah. So it's secured, we just have to.
And is this, but
allocate it.
is this your favorite alternative because this has the most potential benefit for habitat?
It's a more complex answer than that, but yeah, the River Mile 1, which is the 12 acres of floodplain habitat that is currently cut off by the railroad just upstream of here. Has enormous amounts of habitat benefit, but the feasibility of it for many other reasons. Are harder, and
Right.
this is the priority of this one. Ecologically is very high, and there's momentum now and funding and partnership with the county and the land trust that really move it up the.
So I'm sorry, because I hate to keep slowing you down, but when I read through Interflu's description, I didn't see any analysis of, we know that every 10, 20 years, there's a glacial outburst. So there's a major flood event that scours the river and changes the river bed. And we know that this area doesn't look the same as it did in the 1903 pictures we have. The shape of things has changed significantly. So what I didn't see was an analysis of which of these modifications was most likely to survive the next decade or two.
Well, perhaps not the modifications, but the changing, so climate change in general and the changing morphology of the system was one of the key components in our matrix that we incorporated into how we gauged each site.
Right.
And then when we move into the design process for any of those, that is, again, one of the key components that we consider. How will this change over time?
Okay.
Flows, sediment, all
So it's
of
good
the-
enough just to tell me that you're gonna do that.
Yes.
That's fine with me. I just want to know that if we get all this public money invested in this, or I don't, maybe it's not public, maybe it's from private sources, but we get all this money invested in this, and then we know that, we're kind of overdue for a flood event there, and we could wind up spending a whole bunch of money and see it gone. I mean, I think back to the port building, its cruise ship dock, and you can't get. Right.
That's the difference, though. I mean, we're proposing to remove fill, and so.
Right.
And allow the river to have restored processes, and so flooding is part of the process. So
Right.
allowing the floodplain to function more normally. And so it's not like that goes away, like if you put in a bridge and it gets wiped out.
That's kind
different.
of what I felt more comfortable after
Yeah.
reading the document this afternoon.
We're
I would want to
asking
hear
the
more of
river
that.
To flood,
Right.
so that it doesn't,
Right.
we're
Right.
asking it to flood in the right place, so it doesn't
Yeah.
flood in the wrong place.
I want to see I want to see a model. I know this is what Interfluve does, to see a model that after it floods and the flood's gone, is that still there for the next flood?
Mhm.
In any event, it's gonna be less bad than it would be under certain circumstances.
I don't know that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
well, I
that's
think we
part
do
of
know
the-
that.
yeah.
That's part of the work that would happen. This was just concept that was done by Interfluve. We have to move past concept in order to get that information.
And then we get really cool pictures of
Right.
that modeling.
Right, and that's what I want to see. Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
That completely
Same.
informs the design.
great.
Okay, so regarding funding match, we've talked about the watershed group and their ongoing. What we would do is we'd work collaborative with the county, the watershed group. The tribes is also actively looking at funding for this powerhouse, and also for the entire Powerdale corridor. Funding to do the initial feasibility study was provided by BPA, the Confederated Tribes, Pacific Power, Blue Sky Habitat Fund. Pacific Power has also said that they would be interested in possibly partnering with us on this as well. And so there is a lot of momentum about possible funding partners for this. If we don't, it's all up to the county, limited staffing, watershed group wants to see a benefit to the community in the powerhouse, but isn't going to be a partner because it doesn't provide a benefit to the watershed. It's just,
Outside of our mission at that point.
Right.
yeah.
But still, there would be habitat work done on the river. You're still going to seek those funds, and you go after other areas described
So
there.
powerhouse is removed.
No.
At at this location.
Right, so
Yeah.
if we said, hey, no, that powerhouse is sacred, and you cross that off, then you have those other areas that you would proceed with
Yes, we pursue
habitat.
them,
Yep,
whether or not they would.
they may not be as attractive, so
Right,
you may
there's
not get the
issues.
money, because if it's not as attractive to the
Right.
people who are rating your request, they're going to say, yeah, if you had the powerhouse, that would be really cool, but this isn't enough.
Watershed,
Right.
what's the best fit
Right.
for the money, yeah.
So there are grant opportunities for restoring properties. It'd likely be a pretty significant match, and that would have to come from county road fund, or excuse me. County general fund,
And what do you mean by restoring properties in this case? You mean
restoring the powerhouse.
the powerhouse?
And you stated that the $500,000 that was described in the feasibility study, you stated that you thought that was low,
Oh, for the removal,
the removal.
yeah, I do.
Yeah.
And mostly because of the permitting involved. So either way, to remove it, there's gonna be some significant permitting that's included.
Right,
And that would be part of this project.
okay.
Next steps. So, we're here today, we're asking you guys, what's the next steps? Is it removal or is it leave it in place? In October, Watershed Group would be, looking at how they want to spend their funding on the Powerdale corridor, if it's here or if it's somewhere else. And then, future grant opportunities, county, Watershed Group and other partners. We've already had a conversation with, Oregon Parks and Rec, and what possible grants could be afforded to this project. So, I think they're excited about this as well.
Do you have, is that? Those
Yeah.
are our options.
Yeah.
And do we have the bandwidth for managing this project among your agencies? Yes, we're in.
So how does this process work? Are we deliberating on this in the regular meeting or are we
Yes.
deliberating now? Okay,
So we're gonna ask.
we're trying to get all the
questions
information.
now.
Got it.
And then I don't know if you guys are going to stick around, but it's possible that we'd have more questions when we do deliberate. So Commissioner Moretti, do you have some questions, comments? Need more information?
No, this is really exciting and I know we'll talk about this later, but I'm leaning for removal.
Okay. Commissioner Munzer,
No, I don't think I do.
all right. Do you have any more questions?
Yeah, so we haven't talked about the historic value. Yeah, no, I understand that, but I'd like to ask them to explain
A couple
the
more.
analysis that's happened on the historic value of the powerhouse. So what was stated, it was that SHPO was asked if this was eligible for listing on the National Register. And when the answer came back based on the consultant that was hired by Pacificor, that it was not eligible for listing on the National Register and therefore wasn't the mitigation, there was a mitigation listed, et cetera. But there seems to have been an equivalence that was drawn between lack of eligibility to be listed on the National Register and lack of historic significance. And I think those are two very different concepts. We have, for example, we have a downtown historic district that has 40, 50 buildings in it, and only I think 3 or 4 of those are on the National Register. But any of those has to be, we consider the historic significance of those buildings when requests are made to remove them or to modify those. So can you tell me if there was any additional analysis done beyond simply the question of, is it eligible for listing on the National Register?
Not through our process.
Okay.
I wonder if Kate knows what the process was. That
So I saw
did
was,
in that respect.
well, so it was a Pacificor hired an archaeological firm. The archaeological firm wrote an explanation that, yeah, this stuff, it's no longer because you remove the power generation from the powerhouse, it's no longer intact, which
Yeah.
is like, duh. It's surprising you have to hire an archaeologist to tell you that. But I didn't see anything in there beyond the determination where SHPO said that they concurred with what the archaeologist said, that this is not eligible for National Register listing. That's an entirely different concept than, is there historic significance to this? And so that's where I want us to spend a little time about talking about later, is I don't think anyone speaks for the historical value of this building. And it may be that it's such a clear habitat value that would simply overwhelm any potential historic value. And I'm becoming convinced of that as we talk about it, but I'm not there yet. And so if there's anything else you can tell me about how the trade-offs were made. I understand how you looked at the habitat value. I don't understand whether there was
We did not Yeah,
Okay, so that didn't happen.
that's not our expertise
yeah.
and wasn't part of what we were asked to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, yeah, that was done strictly for the permitting necessity of
Obviously, yeah.
weather. And so if they were to say it is eligible, it could still be removed, but oftentimes the mitigation options that they give you have you put together a huge report of the significance of it, you know, really identifying those key aspects of it. And so, you know, I think no one would argue that there is significance in that structure and the kind of historic or the history of the Powerdale infrastructure in general. And we've talked as a group that, you know, this would be a great opportunity if we could find the funding for it and you know, work it into the project that that we could kind of memorialize that historical significance. Not by following the removal and, you know, with some kind of effort.
So I saw Kevin Liberty had said something about that in the minutes, and but were there any specific ideas brought forward for how the historic significance could be, the loss of the historic structure could be mitigated?
Again, I don't think
It's not your
we would be in the
expertise.
best place to answer that.
Okay.
We would certainly, I think Arthur, you would be an ideal person to advise on that effort for sure. But I think there's a lot of support in doing that. What it would look like specifically is not, yeah.
Yeah, and I think the partnership's open to ideas on that. Instead of us as biologists coming up with that would make sense, you know, for us to come up with that.
Don't ask the biologists about the archaeology.
I mean, we find it educated, but yes, but
Yeah, let me
Hey,
just
do
say
you
a
have-
really simple thing. I don't know anyone who walks on that trail along, you know, it's called the Penstock Flume Trail. I don't know anyone who walks on that who doesn't learn something about the history of the power generation. There's not a lot that they learn about why that was actually significant to the development of the Hood River Valley, but you know, it sparks some amount of historic interest. And I hate to see all of that lost, and anything that contributes to the loss of that history, I think is a shame. And
We capture a little bit of that in our watershed comic that came out last year.
Yeah.
I saw the comic, I don't remember that, but
Yeah,
yeah.
it is,
Right.
it's critical history,
Yeah.
particularly to the county as a whole,
Yeah.
but, you know, we would wanna hire the experts to come up with that, how to do that well.
And you do know that there were two Powerdale projects before this?
1910 was the first one.
No, there was actually one in 1904. Yeah.
I think there's a lot of opportunities to do education. You know, post with QR codes that you know lead to, you know, videos and presentations that are, you know, sort of low cost, easy to fix when people vandalize them, you know, things like that could be done.
Yeah.
Could I make just a quick comment? I think that one thing on my mind is the fact that the watershed group working with Interfluve came up with this conceptual design for a habitat restoration project at this site. But I see that there are two really important components that we haven't even worked on the concept level yet, and that's the recreational access and the historical and educational part. So just a reminder, basically, that the concept design is how we might accomplish 1/3 of our goals for that site, but we are keeping those other goals in mind. And then just process-wise, for the SHPO analysis and all that, I would add that PacifiCorp went through that whole permitting process. They hired the archaeologists, not just to say, is this, you know, still eligible for listing in and of itself, but they hired an archaeological firm before they started any of the demolition of any of the hydropower project components. And essentially, it was determined that the decommissioning of the project was going to ruin the whole thing. And therefore, they did have to do that mitigation where they wrote up that really in-depth report documenting all of the historic features, including the powerhouse. So essentially, the work that they did as mitigation and documentation was done as if the powerhouse building were to be removed. And then in the end, that building was not removed. So that part of the permitting or the legally required historic documentation has been completed. I totally agree with Arthur that that's not even considering the question of whether there are still existing historic resources that we should do something with. But I did want to let people know that that really in-depth documentation and reporting was completed. And that's it for me. Thanks.
Thank you. Do you have any more questions?
Not
You
now.
okay? All right.
Thank you.
Nobody else? All right. Thank you very much for the presentation. Okay, the next thing is our work session item, which is the Powerdale corridor. We are being asked, based on the work session presentation, to direct staff and partners on the next steps for the Powerdale Powerhouse and property. So, do we have any more? That was it. We don't have more presentations from staff.
Correct, right? So now it is the board's deliberation
All
in
right.
terms of providing direction to staff.
So our task is to decide if we want to go forward with the demolition of the Powerdale building. We had a lot of information this morning about the options. We heard a lot about the increased amount of flood zone on the sides. And I know last time I was down there, I was really struck by how the dike has changed the ability of the river to spread out in a flood event. And have been here through so many floods that that carries a fair amount of weight for me.
But I'm sorry, that wasn't the initial question. Though. We don't have a proposal yet to remove the powerhouse. So we're not
The
deciding on
question
that.
is, do
Should we
want to
seek
move
that?
forward?
Do we move forward or not?
Right, and I'm sorry, yeah, and we had a whole proposal of all the many options and
Yeah.
all of the things that would flow from this decision, possibly.
We had a discussion on the biological side of it. So we have a very good understanding of, I forget what the term that was used, but these are conceptual plan, thank you. So we have conceptual plans for a bunch of really exciting and interesting biological remediation proposals. We haven't talked about the recreation, we haven't talked about the historical value yet. Yeah.
So we can begin. Do you have, Commissioner Moretti, do you have some thoughts on the Powerdale situation?
After like reading the materials and hearing the presentation in support of biological remediation, to me, it makes sense to move forward with removal. And if the removal of the Powerdale station supports the grant application in its entirety and makes it more attractive with all the partners, I'm in favor of that. And I do still want to make sure that we are somehow preserving the historical context in whatever way that looks. I know that there's still two-thirds of this that hasn't been worked out, and the recreation. So I still want to know more about, okay, if we move forward with removal, what's that gonna look like? And what is the full ask from the county? Because I do believe they're gonna need some matching funds, right?
I heard the word general fund.
Is my audio bad?
No, we hear you.
There was a thought.
No, I'm saying, you said you believe there was an ask for a match, and I'm saying, yes, I heard Kari say
Yeah,
general.
okay, yeah.
So I'm for the removal. If we do the removal, the watershed group would put in their grant funds to provide the match.
Okay, so,
Like for a
okay.
grant, there would be a 20% match. we anticipate that the watershed group would participate in the match portion and then coordinate volunteers for that portion. And then if there's anything over and above, the tribes are also willing to apply for grants. There are other partners that we know of that have shown interest in participating in applying for grants as well. So the removal, it's more likely that we're gonna have 100% funds that are provided through grants. That is, yes,
So this is at no cost to the county
for removal.
or removal.
Aside from staff time. I mean, obviously our
Right.
staff is involved in.
And staff timing.
And so.
Okay,
if-
that helps my point, my side. Thank you.
And then I do want to note that if the county leaves it in place and does some sort of rehabilitation or maintains it, that's at the county's expense.
And we've tried that, right? Didn't we spend like $70,000 to bring in a company from Portland to clean it up?
So,
Yeah, it's garbage removal.
yeah, it's just garbage removal. It wasn't
Right.
anything more than just removing the trash.
Yeah, and it's still not clean. It's not maintaining. It's,
Correct.
I mean, the picture, yeah, it's like,
Is it starting to collect again?
It, not as quickly, because we are going down there pretty frequently and making sure that, you know, things aren't reestablishing down there. But there are still people using that in ways that they shouldn't be using it, and there are still kids going in there and running up against those people that are in there, using it for other purposes, so there are things in there that I wouldn't want my kids to go into.
And the gate, but you're still, and you haven't not yet installed the gate, but you're hoping the gate will help with that also.
Correct, we're going out for RFPs soon, to try and figure out that process.
We've been talking about the gate for.
Yeah, so we got permits
Yeah, months ago.
a few months ago, and then now, we need to find staff time to be able to do that, and with our parks fully, you know, parks and roads fully doing their things, it's very difficult
busy
to
and
find
covered.
time capacity.
So for us to get to the point where we see more of the specific results of the dike removal, et cetera, as was being explained to us. Do we need to start do we need to start the process by the removal?
So we need to have direction on if we want to move forward with removal. If we want to move forward with removal, then the watershed group would be working with their funding partner and starting that process to look at pre-engineering design. They have 100,000 this upcoming year.
Yeah, first step would be engineering. Not just pre-engineering, it would be, that's what we're doing right now, it's the pre-engineering. Conceptual designs have been complete, so it's like at 15%. So the next step would solidly be design
And that would,
Design of removal.
of the removal and habitat restoration.
Okay, so those would be together and.
Yes.
And the habitat restoration engineering would answer Commissioner Babbitt's questions about the effects on, for instance, the.
Yeah, I mean,
Really?
like, for example, parking would, you know, the recreation access over the tracks has been discussed for like over a decade. And that also has to do with what the railroad is willing to accept as, you know, as far as if there were to be a change, they would, you know, have to be amenable to that. The status quo is people cross the tracks. And so this project would not be a detriment to people accessing the area.
What was confusing to me is there were the goals that were listed, and the first goal was habitat, and then you get down to recreation, it says recreation as long as it's consistent with the habitat goal.
Right.
The habitat goal starts with to preserve the existing species, but then it says and promote improvements or some words like that.
Yeah.
And the question is, how does the second clause, the second goal of you have to be consistent with the first goal, deal with the if part of the first?
Yeah.
Did that make sense to you? I think it did.
Yeah, it did. And I mean, and the intent being of the conservation easement goals, that habitat is primary, and existing recreation, as long as existing recreation, as long as it's compatible with, which existing recreation has been compatible with habitat.
Right, but with that habitat improvements that are being proposed, they could very well result in removal of existing recreation.
And increase, right? So now we're introducing a side channel where fishermen could recreate in a different way or provide access to the river in a different way. And so that is going to be part of the
I think
engineering.
there's a little bit of improved access. If you take the riprap away, then people can safely, get to the edge of the water in that section. I don't think that the conservation easement goals were intended to be, quite that, fine scale. So if you were to put in a 50-car parking area, you could argue that that would have a impact, like a real change in people. And I'm not saying, so right now, the parking as is, if you were to someplace else in the corridor somehow add a parking lot, that's sort of an extreme example of allowing,
Right.
An increased recreation impact. I think that.
Which is not compatible with the habitat, so
Right,
goal
exactly.
2 would be incompatible with goal 1 in that case.
Exactly.
Just to cut to the chase, I am, what I'm looking for, so number one, I'm disappointed that in the county's ownership from 2013 to 2025, that building has been entirely destroyed. And I think I know that none of you are responsible for this, but I think that really speaks poorly of the county. And I really hate to see that. I think that there was significant historic value there. It could have been something which could have been preserved in a sensitive way that could have benefited the community, but I think that it's gone. I've been convinced that it's gone, but now I want to see us create a structured interaction so that as we move forward on getting that out of there and now working on the habitat restoration, which is very exciting projects, that we do so in a way that preserves our community's recreation and historic aspects also. I know that there are a lot of people who probably won't care about the habitat, but care a lot about their recreational access. And then there are people who are all about another one, but I don't see that we have a way to balance that stuff very well because we have this group, which is really a biology group. And the other stuff seems to be on the side for it. So I'm wondering how we can move forward and make sure that we still get recreational access and that we do something meaningful to acknowledge the history. That's what I want.
So, I mean, part of this project is also public outreach, right? I mean, that's gonna be a requirement of the project.
No, I think those words are all great. What I see though is that we don't have a process in place that will allow decision-making that will balance those things. The current decision-making process is very much a decision-making process emphasizing habitat. And I'm looking for how we.
And I will say the
all
Powerdale
that.
Lands Advisory Committee is part of, also weighs in, and that's not just biologists, that's, the Parks Department, and I know, and also Columbia Land Trust is, Kate's managing for recreation and, recreation as well. So biology is not the only seat at the table, I would say.
And what we heard Kate say is that the process based on the conservation easement, moves forward with making sure that number 2 and 3 get wrapped into the conversation, which are the two pieces that you were speaking of. And so I think there is more to say there. Kate was not able to stay, but I think there's more to say there in terms of laying out the process for evaluating the ultimate design and outcomes of the area.
I think everyone wants something good to happen. I'm not convinced that we're setting ourselves up for success because I feel like we could have. I worry that what's going to come out of this is going to give short shrift to recreation and history. So
Why can't we just say right now that that's what we want?
well,
moving forward?
that's what I am. I'm asking if we can think of structural ways of
I
emphasizing.
mean, I think we can just say that moving forward, we want to move forward, but we want to be mindful of the recreation, the history, and obviously what they're doing with the habitat of it. And as long as that's on record.
I think that's a good first step.
Yeah. I will add that when I go down there, the recreation I do is further south of that area.
When you
Maybe
start
like
there.
further south along the railroad tracks and then over following the water pipe, and that's where we jump in the water and picnic, and it's not necessarily by the power station now.
No, but Letty, if the road were closed off and there were no parking down there and there were no access.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
That's what I'm talking about.
right,
That's not on the
yeah.
table.
That's great. That's not what I understood, right? I don't see how we,
Oh, I got it. Need that clear. Yeah, it would. Yeah, the existing parking would need to be maintained. It might not be in exactly the same, it might get adjusted, but the amount of parking, my understanding in the conversations is that there was broad understanding that that would be maintained.
great. So if
The
we can
recreation
say
part
that,
is maintained as part of this, correct?
great. I didn't get that.
That's what I thought, yeah.
So if we can get that, if we can get an understanding that there will be a significant effort at acknowledging the history, that somehow acknowledging the history is going to be wrapped into this, then I think we can make something happen.
If we had a motion, we could work on the motion. Is there a proposal
motion?
for?
Do we need a motion? or
I
just
think
a
we were
recommendation?
being asked for a motion, yes.
Or just direction
Pardon?
or a motion?
A
We were
motion
being-
on direction.
Yes.
Yes. We are being asked for a
I'm
motion.
happy to make a motion to give staff direction to move forward with plans on removal of the Powerdale station,
The Powerdale building.
Powerdale building
Powerhouse. Yeah,
for biological remediation, historical, help me with the words, and recreation.
historical acknowledgement, maybe.
Yeah, I'd say to move forward with removal of the building with the proviso that the process maintain public recreation access at similar level to today, and include a significant acknowledgement of the historic special historic value of the site, which is being modified.
Yes, so
Is that too long a motion?
Motion. She types really fast.
Whose motion is it?
It's Letty's.
So,
mine, and it sounds like your second, Arthur.
I'm seconding, yeah.
All right, do we have any discussion? No, okay. Commissioner Moretti,
Yes.
Commissioner Munson,
yes.
Commissioner Babbitt.
Yes.
Chair votes yes. And I have to say, I'm very glad that we're going in a direction that will help mitigate the flooding, because of all of the things that we talked about. The fact that that might protect upper parts of the river more, and also just let the river be more natural and do what it's supposed to do will help